The title of this episode of this podcast is Are We a Democracy? And I sometimes do this. I'll have a thematic title as opposed to a title that picks up on something in the news. But the reason I do this is because we have these big words, these ideas that are used. Democracy. Republicans are enemies of democracy. Democracy is on the ballot. Democracy is threatened. These kinds of things. And I think it's helpful from time to time to try to clarify what it is that we mean. Now, there's a common habit on the right whenever I use the term democracy. Even though I've thought a lot about the term and I don't use it easily or promiscuously, people say, well, Dinesh, I want to remind you that we're not a democracy, we're a republic. And the people who say that are making an important point, which it's not that I don't agree with. But I also don't agree that we should repudiate completely the concept of democracy. We're not a pure democracy, and we're not a pure democracy in two senses, which I'm going to explicate. But at the same time, we do have a democratic form of government. We do have a constitutional democracy, a democracy that is hedged and circumscribed in important ways. Now, let's begin with simply the meaning of the word democracy. It comes out of the word demos, the Greek word demos, which just means the people. And of course, the second part of the term means to rule. So rule of the people. Now, in the ancient world, we had direct democracy. This would be ancient Athens, for example, in the 5th and 4th centuries BC. The citizens themselves, or at least all eligible citizens, at that time they were male, they were citizens that had some stake in the society. So even though Athens had a population of about 40,000, about 12,000 people were eligible. But they would all show up, or as many of them as chose to would show up and vote. Vote on whether to go to war, vote on whether to raise taxes, vote on whether or not to build a temple to Athena. And that is ancient democracy, which was direct democracy. Now, we don't have that type of democracy in the modern world, not because we can't have it. We actually have the type of technology today where you could actually give everyone a tablet. Any important question comes up, you know what? Citizens just go ahead and vote. And that decides the issue. Why do you need somebody else to vote for you? Well, we have the system today, all over the West, and in fact, many other parts of the world, including places like India, countries in Africa, and so on, representative democracy. So this is the first way in which we are not a kind of direct or pure democracy. We have a representative democracy. But representative democracy also has two forms, and it's important to distinguish them because the first form is, let's call it parliamentary democracy. This is what the British have, and this is what the Indians have in India. And that means that you don't vote for an individual so much as you vote for a party. And that party then becomes the winner of the election, and its leader, whoever that is, becomes the prime minister. That's the case right now with Rishi Sunak in England. Kind of funny, you got an Indian who's actually the prime minister of England, and then of course you have Modi, an Indian who's prime minister of India. But nevertheless, they have the same system. And let's remember that parliament in these societies basically has virtually untrammeled power. Now, India does have a constitution. By the way, England, interestingly, does not have a written constitution. England has what is known as the common law. And so, yes, courts do have some say, but by and large, Parliament has, you may say, almost unquestioned and almost final authority in deciding matters. There's no check on the majority. In that sense, what the founders feared, something that the founders called tyranny of the majority does exist by and large in parliamentary systems. Now, again, in India, there are rights and courts can step in. But again, courts are generally a little intimidated to protect anything other than the most enumerated and specified rights for the simple reason that they are, you may say, pushed against the wall by the dominant power of the parliamentary majority. This is all very different from the United States, where we don't have a parliamentary system. We don't actually have a prime minister at all. We have a legislature, which is elected separately, the House and the Senate, and the president, who's elected separately. So we have these ideas, separation of powers, checks and balances. And so the system here is guaranteed not only to set power against power. This is what Madison talks about in Book 10 of The Federalist. But a system in which there are specified constitutional rights, and courts are empowered to protect these rights against the majority. So America has majoritarian elements in our system, and we have anti-majoritarian elements. And so our system is a hybrid. I think this is what people mean when they say, hey, we're not a democracy, we're a republic. Another way to put it is we are a constitutional democracy in which the founders were just as worried. By and large, democracy emerged in the modern era to replace the tyranny of one or the tyranny of the few, monarchy or aristocracy, and replace it with the rule of the people. But the founders were worried just as much. They were worried about the tyranny of the one, but they were also worried about the tyranny of the many. They were worried about 51% or 55% of people in a country banding together and running roughshod over the dignity and freedom and rights and opportunities of the other 49 or the other 45%. So the founders realized we need a system that protects the 51 and yes, does give the 51% through a constitutionally elected system the right to rule, but the rights of the other 49% are also sacrosanct.